Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're diving headfirst into the dramatic world of French politics in 2024, a year that, well, frankly, it reads like a political thriller with two government collapses in a single year. So buckle up. We're going to unpack how France found itself in this, well, unprecedented situation and why it matters to you, even if you don't typically follow international politics.
Yeah, it was a turbulent year for France, no question. It all began with the 2024 European Parliament elections, which saw the far-right National Rally Party pull off a significant victory.
The RN.
The RN, yes.
This win for the RN, and it wasn't just a French issue, though, right?
No, absolutely not. This sent ripples throughout Europe.
Yeah.
It signaled a real shift in the political landscape with far-right sentiments gaining traction across the continent.
Yeah.
This put immense pressure on President Macron, who responded by dissolving the National Assembly and calling for new legislative elections. He was hoping for a strong showing from his party to regain control. But, well, that's not what happened.
So these snap elections in June and July ended up creating a hung parliament. Can you explain what that means for those of us who might not be familiar with the term?
Sure. A hung parliament is when no single party wins a majority of seats. So this creates a political deadlock, as no party has enough votes to pass legislation or form a government on their own. In France's case, the left-wing New Popular Front, or NFP, secured the most seats, 193 to be exact. Macron's Renaissance Party came in second, with 166 seats, followed by the RN with 142.
So with the NFP holding the most seats, what happened next?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. Typically, the French president appoints the leader of the largest party as prime minister. This practice, known as cohabitation, has been a key feature of the French political system. Since the Fifth Republic was established in 1958, it's a way to ensure, some level of cooperation and balance between the executive and legislative branches, even when they're controlled by different political parties.
So cohabitation has happened before.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't a completely unheard of situation.
Not at all. In fact, France has had 3 periods of cohabitation in its recent history. But in 2024, Macron decided to break with this tradition. He refused to appoint the NFP's candidate, Lucie Castex, as prime minister.
Wow. That's a bold move. Why would he do that?
Well, many believe Macron saw appointing a left-wing prime minister as a threat to his agenda and potentially his ability to govern effectively.
I bet that decision didn't go over well.
You're right. It created a huge political crisis. The NFP felt slighted, the public was confused, and France was essentially left without a functioning government. For a record-breaking 51 days, a caretaker government was in place. But it had limited powers, so it couldn't really address the country's challenges effectively.
That's more than 7 weeks without a proper government. It must have felt like the country was holding its breath. What happened during this political limbo?
Well, the political maneuvering intensified. The NFP wasn't just going to sit back and accept Macron's decision. They took a dramatic step and attempted to impeach him, using a rarely invoked article of the French Constitution.
Whoa. An impeachment attempt. That definitely raises the stakes. What were the grounds for impeachment?
France Unbowed, the dominant party within the NFP, accused Macron of breaching his duties by refusing to adhere to the traditional practice of cohabitation. They argued that his actions undermined the spirit of the Constitution and jeopardized the stability of the country.
So while all this was happening, was Macron just twiddling his thumbs?
Not exactly. He seemed to be playing a strategic waiting game, hoping the political pressure would ease. He even delayed appointing a new prime minister until after the Summer Olympics, which was highly unusual. This delay further fueled speculation about his motives and added to the public's anxiety.
So, with France in a state of political paralysis, what was the mood like on the ground?
Tense. Various organizations, including trade unions and student groups, organized protests and strikes. To express their dissatisfaction with the political deadlock, they demanded action, clarity, and a resolution to the crisis. This added another layer of pressure on Macron to find a way out of the impasse.
So we've got a hung parliament, a president who's breaking with tradition, an impeachment attempt, and protests in the streets. It sounds like France was on the verge of a complete meltdown.
It was certainly a volatile situation, and in the midst of all this chaos, Macron finally made his move. In September, he appointed Michel Barnier as prime minister.
Who was Michel Barnier, and why did Macron choose him?
Barnier was a seasoned politician with extensive experience. He was a former EU negotiator and was seen as a relatively safe choice, someone who could potentially bridge the political divide. and bring some much-needed stability to the government.
So was this the turning point? Did Barnier manage to calm the storm?
Well, he managed to form a minority government
Mm-hmm.
with support from several parties, but it was a fragile coalition from the start. And as we'll see in part 2 of our deep dive, this brief period of stability was short-lived. Barnier's appointment, it might have brought a temporary lull in the political storm, but the underlying issues that fueled the crisis, they were still simmering beneath the surface.
So it was more than just a power struggle between political parties.
Exactly, yeah. This crisis exposed deeper anxieties and divisions within French society, anxieties that had been building for years.
Can you elaborate on those anxieties? What were the driving forces behind this discontent?
Well, one key factor was the rise of populism in the far right, the National Rally's success in the European Parliament elections. It wasn't an isolated incident. It reflected a broader trend of dissatisfaction with the traditional political establishment and a growing appeal of nationalist, anti-establishment rhetoric.
So people were looking for alternatives, even those outside the mainstream.
Precisely. A significant portion of the French electorate felt unheard and disenfranchised. They felt that the traditional left-right political spectrum no longer addressed their concerns. They were looking for someone who would shake things up, challenge the status quo, and offer solutions to their problems.
And this sentiment wasn't limited to supporters of the far right.
No, not at all. The left-wing NFP also capitalized on this wave of discontent, albeit from a different ideological perspective. They promised a break from Macron's perceived elitism, a more egalitarian society, and a focus on social justice. They appealed to voters who felt left behind by globalization and neoliberal economic policies.
It sounds like the political center, the moderate voices, were losing ground.
That's a good observation. This polarization of French politics, with the extremes gaining traction, made it incredibly difficult to find common ground and build consensus. It was like everyone retreated to their ideological camps, unwilling to compromise or even engage in meaningful dialogue.
That's a recipe for gridlock and instability.
Exactly. And this political instability had consequences that extended far beyond the halls of government.
What kind of consequences are we talking about?
And for starters, it impacted France's economy. The uncertainty surrounding the government's ability to function created a drag on investment and business confidence. This, in turn, could lead to slower economic growth and potentially job losses.
So it wasn't just a political crisis, it was an economic one as well.
Absolutely. And then there was the impact on France's international standing. France is a major player on the world stage, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, a leading member of the European Union, and a nuclear power. But this political turmoil, it raised questions about its stability and its ability to play a leadership role on the international stage.
It must have been a concern for France's allies.
You can imagine their anxiety. A weakened and unstable France could create a power vacuum in Europe and embolden adversaries who seek to undermine Western unity and democratic values.
So France was facing internal turmoil and external pressure. It must have felt like being caught in a perfect storm.
That's a good analogy. And this storm was fueled by more than just political maneuvering and ideological clashes. Economic anxieties played a crucial role.
What were some of the economic issues at play here?
France, like many other developed countries, was grappling with income inequality, rising cost of living, and a sense that the benefits of economic growth weren't being shared fairly. Many people felt that the system was rigged against them, that the wealthy were getting richer, while they were struggling to make ends meet.
So it's a classic case of the haves and the have-nots.
In a way, yes. And this economic discontent created fertile ground for populist rhetoric, both on the right and the left. People were looking for someone to blame for their struggles, and they were drawn to leaders who promised simple solutions to complex problems.
I can see how that dynamic would further exacerbate the political divide.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle. Economic anxiety fuels political polarization, which in turn makes it harder to address the underlying economic problem.
Were there any other factors contributing to this sense of unease and fragmentation in French society?
Yes, there were. Questions of national identity, immigration, and secularism also played a role. France has a long and complex history with these issues, and they become increasingly contentious in recent years.
It sounds like those are the kind of issues that can easily ignite passionate debate and even social unrest.
You're right. And in a climate of heightened political tension and economic uncertainty, these debates became even more heated. Different groups accused each other of being out of touch, betraying French values, or even threatening the fabric of French society.
So it was a convergence of multiple crises: political, economic, social, and cultural.
Precisely.
Hmm.
And it's important to remember that this isn't unique to France. Many democracies around the world are grappling with similar challenges. The French experience is a case study in how these challenges can intersect and create a perfect storm of instability.
It's a reminder that even in seemingly stable and prosperous societies, there are often deep-seated tensions and vulnerabilities that can erupt unexpectedly.
Absolutely. And in the case of France, the events of 2024 exposed those vulnerabilities
Yeah.
in a dramatic and unsettling way.
But what about the aftermath? How did France navigate this turbulent period, and what lessons can we learn from their experience?
Well, that's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. We'll delve into the fallout of this crisis, the attempts at reform, and the potential future scenarios for France.
We've spent the last two parts of this deep dive examining the chaotic year that was 2024 in French politics. But as they say, every storm eventually runs its course. So what happened after those initial tumultuous months? Did France manage to find its footing again?
Well, it wasn't a quick fix. Remember, Michel Barnier had managed to form a minority government, but it was a delicate balancing act. It only took 3 months for that fragile coalition to collapse after losing a no-confidence vote in December 2024.
That must have been another blow to Macron's authority.
It was. Barnier's government ended up being the shortest serving in the history of the Fifth Republic. This second collapse, in less than a year, sent shockwaves through the country. It really reinforced the sense that the political system was dysfunctional and that France was adrift.
So Macron was back to square one. What did he do next?
In a surprising move, he appointed François Bayrou as prime minister. Bayrou was a seasoned politician, known for his centrist views. But this appointment, rather than calming the markets, actually spooked them.
Why would appointing a centrist figure create such a negative reaction?
Bayrou had a history of making unconventional policy proposals. This, coupled with the ongoing political instability, led to a credit rating downgrade for France by Moody's. It was a sign that international investors were losing confidence in France's ability to manage its economy and its political affairs.
So the political crisis was now spilling over into the economic realm. It sounds like a dangerous spiral.
It was. It demonstrated how political instability can have very real consequences for a country's economic well-being. It underscored the interconnectedness of politics, economics, and international perceptions.
At this point, it must have felt like France was at a crossroads. What were the potential paths forward from this precarious position?
Well, there were several possibilities being discussed at the time. Some argued that France needed a complete overhaul of its political system, perhaps even moving away from the current semi-presidential system. Others believed that the answer lay in finding a way to bridge the political divide and rebuild trust in the existing institutions.
Were there any signs of movement towards either of those solutions?
There were tentative steps taken towards dialogue and reform. Macron initiated a series of consultations with political parties and civil society groups to explore ways to address the underlying causes of the crisis. There was a recognition that the political system needed to be more inclusive and responsive to the concerns of citizens.
That sounds like a step in the right direction, but was there any real appetite for compromise among the political actors?
That was the key question. It's one thing to acknowledge the need for reform, but it's quite another to actually implement it. France was still deeply divided, and there was a lot of distrust between the different political camps.
So the future remained uncertain.
It did. The political landscape was still volatile, and predicting the long-term outcome was like trying to read tea leaves. But one thing was clear. The choices made by French leaders and citizens in the coming years would have profound implications, not just for France, but for the future of Europe as well.
Why would this have such a significant impact on Europe as a whole?
Because France is a cornerstone of the European Union. Its political and economic stability is crucial for the EU's success. If France were to descend into further chaos, it could destabilize the entire European project. Conversely, if France could find a way to overcome its challenges and emerge stronger, it could inspire other European countries facing similar difficulties and reinforce the idea of a united and prosperous Europe.
So it's a story that goes far beyond France's borders. It's a story about the challenges facing democracy in the 21st century.
Precisely. France's experience serves as a cautionary tale, but also as a source of potential lessons for other democracies grappling with populism, political polarization, economic inequality, and social fragmentation.
What are some of the key takeaways from this French political saga that you think our listeners should keep in mind?
I think one crucial lesson is the importance of um, inclusive political systems that give everyone a voice and make them feel like their concerns are being heard. When people feel ignored or marginalized, they're more likely to turn to extreme solutions.
So, addressing inequality and ensuring that the benefits of economic growth are shared fairly is essential.
Absolutely. Another key takeaway is the need for leaders who can build bridges, foster dialogue, and find common ground. Leaders who are willing to listen to different perspectives, even those they disagree with, and seek solutions that benefit the entire society, not just a select few.
It sounds like a tall order in our current political climate where polarization and division seem to be the norm.
It is a challenge, but it's not insurmountable. It requires a commitment to civil discourse, a willingness to compromise, and a recognition that we're all in this together.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the 2024 French political crisis. It's been quite a journey. We've explored the causes, the consequences, and the potential paths forward. It's a story that's still unfolding, and it's one that we'll all be watching closely. What are your final thoughts for our listeners as they continue to follow this story?
I think it's important to remember that democracy is a work in progress. It's messy, it's imperfect, and it requires constant vigilance and engagement from all of us. It's up to each of us to stay informed, to participate in the political process, and to hold our leaders accountable. The future of France, and indeed the future of democracy itself, depends on it.
Well said. And with that, we'll wrap up this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit inspiring. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the issues that matter most.